join.
The Sunday the clocks go forward is always the quietest Sunday of the year. Oh, people will be just... I love the panic in people when they realise they've missed the clocks. One year, my favourite year, was when one of our American members of the church thought it was the other direction. And so... and that was in the winter one. And so they put the clocks forward when they thought they were going back. So they turned up church 2 hours early. And then thought, oh, it must have been the wrong week. So then came back at what would have been the normal time, an hour early, and then came back a third time when it was appropriate. That's very fun. So, yeah, obviously, if someone comes in the door, we wouldn't point and laugh at them, would we, JP? That would be rude. Definitely do. So today, I am going to be quick today, because I know for the last few weeks I've been going over time somewhat, and the poor kids workers are like, come on, Phil, please. We've run out of activities. And I'm going to be really simple. This is like Jesus 101. But it's going to be challenging. And so this is one of the simplest concepts if you're a follower of Christ, but it's one of the most challenging too. But before we get into that, who's enjoying the cost of living crisis? Yeah. Oh, no? Not enjoying oh my word, how much is everything? It's ridiculous. It is really quite ridiculous. And the price of stuff right now is crazy. And me and Steph have shopped at budget supermarkets for years, like at least 7 years. Just budget supermarkets. We've all ever done. Since we had our second child, it's like, we're not doing this like normal supermarket stuff anymore. So we've been doing that for years and years and years. But Steph went to the shop the other day, and she'd done a shop, and she'd come back, honestly, I was working on the computer. In fact, I was doing this. I was typing up some stuff. And she walked in and went, £176! Like that, with that tone. She's like, £176 for like a normal, like one of our just big shops. I know some of you do a big shop, or some of you just like Matt and Sally just go to Tesco's every day for what they need that day. Well, they live so close, why not? But we go and do a big shop, but she's like, usually for one of our big shops, it had been a year or two ago, like 90 quid, and now it's like 176, like nearly double the money, probably more than double, depending on what you're buying. But it's like, she was like, oh, this is crazy, it's mental. And so now, even in budget supermarkets, there's certain things that Steph won't buy now. She's like, even in the budget supermarket, she's like, I'm not willing. I'm not paying for that. I'm not paying that. She says it all the time. I'm not paying that for that. Because Steph's a bit like that. I ain't doing it. I ain't doing it. And she's not willing to pay for them. For example, this has been years, but like some of you are big fans, but like Heinz baked beans, Steph has refused for years. She's not ever going to buy them. She found a replacement one that's just as good in her mind, and probably is, but she refuses to buy it, and now it's like, was it like 17 quid for a tin of Heinz baked beans? 95p. See, near enough. But like, we stopped sort of doing takeouts and stuff as well, because the price of them were ridiculous. We didn't do a lot of them before, but we went for a cheap one to the chip shop, and I come back, I was like, Steph, I've had to remortgage the house. I'm sorry. We had 3 portions of chips, and we were sharing a sausage, and it was like 120 grand. It's ridiculous, and I'm exaggerating somewhat, but she's not willing to pay for certain things, and there's some folk out there who are not earning a lot of money, or some of our users of Food Bank perhaps even, who are unable to pay for it. And we're able at the minute. We're able, but we're not willing. She's able to pay over the price for something, but she's not willing to do it. And why? Because all of our excess funds as a family, we're saving up because we want to go on holiday. And so the kids, it'll be like 3.5 years. We're going this summer. We're going to go on a sunny holiday. And it's been 3.5 years since we took the kids on holiday. And it's like something we really want to do. So every little bit of extra money we can squeeze out, wring out, goes into that pot. And so she's just thinking there, looking at, some vine-ripe tomatoes or what, and going, I ain't doing it. I want to go on holiday. And so she's not willing. She's able, but she's not willing to pay the cost. And so... because there's some things that we want more than certain things. We're willing to go without some things in favor of something that we want more. And we do that all the time in our life. And so in this cost of living crisis, for us, we're able to pay the cost, but we're unwilling to pay the cost. And what's my point? I think we, the church, and I don't mean just us in the room, I mean the church, if we're not careful, fall into what I call, and I think I've coined this phrase, the cost of loving crisis. That we can easily fall into the cost of loving crisis, where we're able to pay the cost of love, to love, but we're unwilling to. And if we find ourselves in that place as an individual or as a church locally or as the church collectively across the nations, then we are in a crisis. And some of you will be like, hold on, Phil, wait a minute. Love is free. God's love is free. In fact, he loves us. His love sets us free so we can love people freely. And I hate to burst your bubble, but love is not free. Love costs. Love is not free, love costs. And when I first met Steph, I wanted to demonstrate my love for her, and it cost. It did. It cost me to demonstrate my love to Steph. It cost me in prezzies, in dates, all that sort of stuff. I know some of you will throw some stuff back at me. You don't have to do it in that way. It doesn't have to cost you money. It doesn't have to cost you money. But it'll cost you. And I was a poor student. I was a really poor student. Worked as hard as I could in the summer holidays, all the holidays, to pay myself through university. But I'm a bit frugal. I wanted to have max effect for minimum cost. Who's like that? You know, you don't mind paying a lot of money as long as you're getting value for what you're paying for. I like to pay the smallest amount for the biggest thing. So like when I was trying to demonstrate my love for Steph and it cost me either financially or some other means, I want to get the biggest bang for my buck. I want to get the biggest sort of reciprocated amount of love for the smallest input of effort and time and money. And if you're not, you're just not efficient. So that's what I was like. As a poor student, I had to be like that in terms of finance. But this sort of continued to our sort of marriage and wedding day, really, because Steph worked in the shoe shop, Brantano. Is it still going? Has it collapsed? Mr. Shoe? Oh, did they buy them out? I don't know. Brantano shoe shop. She, worked like £1.20 an hour. It was ridiculous. So stupid for peanuts. And she worked in this shoe shop, but her boss was a lovely lady, and she'd been there for months. And then I'd proposed, we were going to get married, we started the planning process, and I walked in one day to pick her up, and she was like, I was like, what? She's like, and she sort of fished this magazine out of Disney weddings, and I was like, no. I just walked out. No. I like theme parks and all that, but I was like, no. And she's like, it's great. My boss has been telling me all about it. It's beautiful. And it was like immense, like how posh it was, like the Grand Floridian Hotel. Anyone been to Orlando? It's like, it's ridiculous. Like, too much for me. I'm sort of a cheap sort of village hall sort of geezer. And I was like, this is not happening. I was like, it's just going to be ridiculous money. We can't do it. And I want to frame it that her parents and my parents, between us, we would have covered like the costs of that and most of it probably on her parents as well because we were poor students. And I was still like, even for other people, like, no, it's not worth it. I'm not willing to pay the price for that. And then I've done my research into the cost of weddings in the UK. And me and Steph have got big families. Like both of us have got massive families. Everyone just keeps breeding. They're like rabbits. There's hundreds of them. And so like, I'd done the maths and I was like, oh my word, this is ridiculous. Like, because obviously I'd never got married before, so I had never thought to look into it. But, and the thing is with UK social etiquette, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but you have to invite family that you don't even like. People you hate even. I don't hate anybody, but like, even if you hate somebody, you still got to invite to your wedding. Because if not, your aunt or your mum will gibber in your ear for the rest of your life. Not for the day. For your life. And so it's social etiquette, at least in the UK, that you invite everyone you hate and everyone you like. But I looked into it, and the venue costs were ridiculous. Because it's a wedding, they just double the price right away, obviously. And then all the add-ons. Like, I was looking at places like, this is a nice venue, because I was looking for nice, because Steph wanted nice. She wanted fancy, nice, posh. And I'm like, okay, right. And I was looking at these posh venues. It's like, oh, we can just about afford that. And then it's like, right, here are the add-ons. Would you like chairs? Would I like chairs? No, I want everyone to stand the whole day. Add on chairs, this amount per chair. Do you want a cover on them chairs? No, we don't need a cover, do we? Look at the state of the chairs, like our chairs. There's stuff all over. We need covers on. Everything was an add-on. Everything. And you book the dining package. You look at the dining package, it's like, that's a lot of money. Okay. And then it's like, but would you like cutlery? Cutlery? You add on cutlery to the booking. But like, what? Like my family, you don't need the cutlery. And it's like, looking through these venues, I was like, what, do you have to pay extra for toilet paper? What? Or every flush of the loo, is that another £1 on the bill? And it added up, and like to me, it was like, this is ridiculous. And like I said, and the parents would have covered a lot of that cost and stuff, but love is not free, love costs. And again, for maximum effect, I wanted to spend the least amount of money for the maximum effect for Steph. And suddenly, Disney seemed more appealing. I'd done the maths. And all of a sudden, I was like, you know this Disney, I'm coming round to the idea. Because all of a sudden, I've done the maths on it. It's like, we're only allowed, by the rules in the document, we're only allowed to include a few people. Otherwise, you have to book the next package up, which was ridiculous, unaffordable. It's like, you can only bring like 13 people. I was like, that's cool. And you've got to pay for dinner for 13 people instead of 200 people. And so I'd done the maths on it. It was like, this is a good idea. And I get a holiday out of it. I was like, this is banging. I know some of you women in here are hating me right now. But I wanted the max effect. And it was a fancy wedding. And that's what we ended up doing. We went to Florida. We got married at Disney World. It was like a fifth of the price we would have done had we stayed and had a wedding in the UK. But Steph got this fancy thing that looked all nice. The people who meant the most to her were there as well. And it was all good. And we just had a big party in the Carnegie Room when we got home with all the hundreds of family that we've got as well and put on a buffet. But I wanted to have max effect. I wanted to get what she wanted from it. I wanted to get the kudos of it as well and the reward for it, this fancy wedding at minimum cost, and not have to get a £15,000 loan out to pay for dinner for 200 people. And so that was where I was, and some of you aren't like that, and that's cool, but it was a cost that I was not willing to pay, even for love. It was a cost that I was like, there's the line in the sand. I'm not willing to pay that, even for love. And obviously today I'm not talking about romantic love, not really talking about that, but loving all people. Because perhaps no one's ever told you that love is not free. It always costs someone something. And some of you might push back against this with the love of God, and you think, no, that's not true. I've been the recipient. I feel and give out love. It is free, and for me, it's not. Love is not free. It's always costing someone something. And you might be like, no, Phil, God's love is free. And in Scripture, it talks about the free love of God. God's love is free. And I want to ask, was it? Because in 1 John 4, 7-10, it says this, dear friends, let's continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. But it goes on to say this, and we know this. This is Jesus 101, verse 9. God he demonstrated how much he loved us by sending his one and only Son into the world. In other versions, it says he gave so that we might have eternal life through him. And check this, verse 10, it says this is real love. Not that we loved God, but he loved us first. He done it first. And it says this, and he sent his Son as a sacrifice for our sin, to take away our sin. He loved us so much, he gave first, before we gave. We did not reciprocal relationship, one-way traffic. He gave and sacrificed his Son. It cost him that. So this free love that we talk about, we understand what we mean when we say that, but it cost. It cost God the Father seeing his Son go through agony. It cost the sacrifice of Jesus himself, God in man form, going through that process. That was the cost. And so, love is not free. It always costs someone something. And so I want you to think about this. What we mean when we think about free love is we think about, not the 60s, but free love in the general sense, is we think of it in these terms really, that love can be free to the recipient, but it sometimes costs the giver everything. So you can receive love for free, But it cost someone something. When God loved us so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever should believe in him shall not perish but inherit eternal life. He gave the sacrifice. It cost him everything, if you like. But as a recipient, we got it for free. You know in shops when they give you little freebies, you don't do it very often very well. Do you want a taster? It's free. It's not free. It's free to you. The company has to pay. It costs something. It costs someone something. But as a recipient, we get it for free. But as a giver, it costs. And sometimes it costs us everything. John 15:12-13 says this. This is my commandment. So this is Jesus telling us this. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend. Check that out. There's no greater love than that, than you laying down your life, almost giving up everything, giving up your life for the sake of somebody else. And that's a picture of what Jesus done for us. But he's saying there's no greater love than someone doing that for somebody else, giving up your very life, giving up everything. That is love, and it costs. That pure, real love costs, and it costs dearly. So if you truly love someone, it can cost you even your life. And I love Steph so much, I still do, more than the day we got married, more than when we were dating. And that love costs. It does, it costs me. And it costs her in return. It costs us early on in showing it in prezzies and weddings and time and energy and money and ego. Sometimes it costs you your ego in a relationship. Doing things you don't want to do. Going against yourself, it costs you to love somebody. And when we love, we give up. This is what I think a nice way of putting it is when we truly love, when we love in the way that God perhaps calls us to love, when we love, we give up more than we get. Even though if everyone was to do the calculations when you die and it was all even, the motive in which we love is to give up more than we get. And when you're in a reciprocal loving relationship, when both parties are doing that, it ends up being even, let's say. Not that everyone's keeping score, because in Corinthians it says that love doesn't keep scores. But we love from a point of giving up more than we get. And when both parties do that in a marriage, in a friendship, in a just a normal relationship at work, whatever, where someone is giving more, their motive is to give more than they take, but both parties do it, then you have a reciprocal loving relationship that's healthy and ends up balancing itself out over time, not because that's the purpose, but just because that's what happens. But when we really love, when we truly love, we give up more than we make. We make the first move. And like it said in that scripture earlier, but again, 1 John 4:19 says it, we love because he first loved us. He loved us before we loved him. It wasn't like, if you love me, then I'll love you back, like girls in the playground. If you do this, or boys in the playground, if you do that, and bargaining. It was like, God's like, I'm going first. I'm making the move. I'm going to love you. It's going to cost me. It's going in this direction. And I'm sure God loves it when we love him back. But he'd do it nonetheless, even if we didn't. Because he died for us even when we were sinners. In fact, it says that in Romans 5:18. But God showed, check it, demonstrated. He showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. So it's like this one-way traffic of love, especially initially. And for me, that's love. He loved with no guarantee of return. He didn't love so we could love him, even though that works too. He loved because he is love. That's why God loved us and gave his only begotten Son, because he is love. And love always costs. You know, when I think about us as a church, you know, many of you are involved in what we do as a church and want to build church, part of Cruise, want to build what we do to love our community in lots of different ways, perhaps. But one of them ways for us is to love people through Food Bank. Like we run a food bank with a sort of the hub of Food Bank in the Breckland area, actually. And a lot of time and money and effort and goes into that from me and Steph, but hundreds of volunteers as well. And so for us to love people through Food Bank, it costs us. It costs us. In fact, I went shopping 5 times this week because we're running low on food. I spent £1,800 on food this week, which I would have got double for last year, by the way. Actually, I would have probably broke my car with the suspension. Done that over the years as well. Lost 2 or 3 cars to suspension. Should probably buy a van. But it costs us, even we try not to buy food, it comes from the public generally, but all the running costs of that. But actual financial cost, it costs us. But it costs us in time and energy and sweat and bad backs and all that sort of stuff. It costs us. And I'll be really honest with you, there's a mixed bag of clients that we get in the door. There's a mixed bag, and majority are in the middle. They're just between these 2 extremes I'm going to paint. The majority are in the middle. But you get people like a 30-year-old dad who's been working all his life and for some reason is in a pickle, sat in front of me crying, sort of bloke who would never cry in front of anyone in his life, broken that he's having to use a food bank, and just embarrassed and just got so much going on, just feeling like he's drowning. And he's just like, and thank you ever so, I don't know what to do with that. Like, and me as a bloke just being like, all right, mate, do you want to hug? I don't know. What's the rules? As an Englishman, all the way from that end of the spectrum to someone who walks in like they own the joint, thinking, well, what are you giving me? It's my right to have this. Coming in with an attitude, a chip on their shoulder, a sort of entitled, rude persona. And there aren't many that do that. But as a volunteer or as someone who's sat there trying to help someone who comes in like, can I tell you, it's really, really difficult. It's really difficult. And not many people like that, mostly in between, somewhere along the spectrum, such a mixed bag of people. But all these people have one thing in common. They need food. For different reasons, but they need food. But more so than that, all these people actually need love. That's what they need. They need love more than they need food, perhaps. But really, the needing of food and us giving the food is a demonstration of us loving them. And so they need food, they need love, and them 2 things overlap somewhat. A food is an expression of that love, and the work that goes into providing that food is immense. To do that, to love them, it costs us. It costs us as a church. It costs us. And for us generally as a church, doing everything that we do, to have this building, to run services, to run events, to share God's love in the way that we try and do it, it costs us. And it costs us more than perhaps many of you can imagine. And I'm not talking just finances, even though it does cost that as well. Because this church was built on the notion of cost. It was built on the notion of whatever the cost. And I've told this story a few times before, and so has Steph. The night before that me and Steph took on the church, and it was in a really difficult situation that we done that. Like, Steph woke up with a dream and felt in her spirit that God was saying, will you build my church? And she's like, yeah, but for whatever the cost. And Steph was like, yeah. And she woke up 3 times that night of God saying, will you do this? And it's going to cost you. Are you willing to do it? And Steph's like, whatever the cost. And that was like the start of us building Liberty Church was framed off of that notion of me and Steph as a couple of willing to give whatever the cost. And this isn't a moan, but most people would not have a clue of the costs that it's cost me and Steph to do what we do. And that's okay. That's cool. Because love costs. And love isn't just a noun, it's a verb. It's a doing word. We're here for an English lesson. But to love sometimes means paying a cost you don't want to pay, simply because love demands it. It's a cost you don't want to pay, but you have to pay because love demands it. It's demanding. Some of you got some demanding children that demand love in a particular way. But in Romans 13:7-8, and I'm going to read from, have we got the English Standard Version? It says this, pay to all what is owed to them. That sounds like good sort of conscientious sort of person. Pay to people what you owe them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Some of you may not agree with that, but you should. Revenue to whom revenue is owed. Respect to whom respect is owed. Honor to whom honor is owed. Pay what you're due. That's what you owe to people. It says this, I love it. Verse 8, owe no one anything. Don't be in debt to somebody. Pay what you owe. But it says this, except to love each other. It's like you don't like live your life in a way that you don't owe anyone anything. And even when you do that, you owe everyone love. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves one another has fulfilled the law. So it's like the writer of Romans here is saying, like, live a life where no one can be like, you owe me that, hold it over you. Like, you want to be even, you want to pay what you due. No one can be like you, that person, that Christian who borrows money, never pays back. Don't be that sort of person. But every essence, every element of your life is, don't owe anyone anything. And even though you live like that, you still owe them love. You still owe them it. It's like, well, hold on, I don't even know this person at Food. What do I owe them love? I don't owe them anything. Paul might disagree. Jesus might disagree. Your Father in heaven might disagree. I believe we must love because we owe it. And when you owe something, it's going to cost you. In the Bible, someone asked Jesus about this loving your neighbor command. Who is it we got to love? How we got to do it? He was looking for a loophole. How can I get around this where I don't have to love as many people as you're calling me to? And we know the story of the Good Samaritan. I won't read it for time. You know it inside out, no doubt. If not, Google it. But the Good Samaritan, where this bloke was beaten on the floor, attacked by robbers, dying on the floor basically, and a priest walked past and crossed the road so he didn't have to deal with it. And then a Levite walked past and again didn't even interact. These two religious men. And then a Samaritan walks past and helps him and binds his wounds, takes him to an inn, pays even out of his own money to a keeper and say, look after him. And if there's any more that you do, I'll owe you on the way back. When I come back through this way, I'll pay you. And Jesus asked in this story to the guy who was trying to ask about it, who was the one who loved his neighbor? Who was the one who loved? And he said the one who helped him, the Samaritan, that person. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. Act like that. Where even though you don't owe them anything, you don't know them, love them like you owe them something. And when you owe them something, it's going to cost you sometimes. And I want you to think about this. This was one-way love. Just one way. Just one way. Not, I'll come back through, get him to write his address down, and then I'll bill him for what the time and effort it's cost me to do this. This was not reciprocal. And so often we think about love and that we love people in this reciprocal nature. I love you, you love me. And as believers in Christ, we're called to do that, to love one another. We're supposed to do that. That's how they know. That's how the world's going to know that we follow Jesus, is how we love one another. But there's also a type of love where it's just one way, not reciprocated. You don't get anything out of it. It's just one-way traffic. And I believe you should love everyone you're in relationship with. We should endeavor to do that. But you don't have to have a relationship with everyone that you love. You can love people one way, non-reciprocated. In this story, there was a cost of loving crisis. In that moment, just this little moment in time, and it was a story that Jesus was telling. But I think it's reflective of the culture at large, back then, probably now, is that there was a cost of loving crisis. For the priest who walked past, the cost to love him, he wasn't willing to pay. Able, but not willing. When the Levite walked past and crossed the street, it was a cost to love that guy that he wasn't willing to pay, but probably able. Wasn't willing to put in the time, the effort, the risk of loss even. Many of us perhaps would be weary of that sort of situation because maybe it's a trap, or maybe we'd get attacked, or maybe we'd get hurt, and there are certain things that we have to put in place perhaps, but for these guys, it was probably more about reputation loss or touching something that was dirty, or they weren't willing to pay the cost to love. It was all about themselves. And so here's the challenge. Like I told you, it was Jesus 101 today, but here's the challenge. Who have you loved lately that didn't love you back, or didn't love you first, or didn't love you at all? And some of you might think, well, that's not how love in relationships would work. No, that's right. In reciprocal love in relationships, that's not how ideally it would work. But God's called us to love beyond just these perfect relationships and just to love one way out of ourselves. Matthew 5, Jesus' words, 5:46 says this. If you love only those who love you, what reward is that? What reward is there for that? Even, check this, even corrupt tax collectors do that much. And that meant a lot in this culture. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Everyone's kind to their friends. Everyone loves people who love them. It's easy. It's like inbuilt. It says even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And Jesus painted this picture of what perfect love is. And this perfect love, which is what he done, was to give out love even though he may not receive it at all. It was one-way traffic. And I want you to think about this, because if indeed love always costs something, if it does always cost something, what about when you're loving someone doesn't cost you anything? I want to ask, is that really love? And it might be a form of love, it might be a part of love. But if it's repaid, if there are people in your world that you love and it's sometimes difficult, but it's reciprocated in a different way at a different time with a different metric of measure. So maybe a better question is this: who have you loved lately where it cost you? And I'm actually asking you today, who have you loved lately where it actually cost you, where it was one-way traffic? Where you're not looking to get back. You're not loving your spouse because she loves back or he loves back or because it's a happy family or a friendship or anything. Because that's all good and important as well. I'm not talking about that today. I'm talking about where you've loved and it's cost you. And you'll never get it repaid. And you have to pay it because you owe it, because love demands it. I'm not talking about for affection or something in return. But you've actually sacrificed. When was the last time? Who have you loved lately where it cost you, where it's sacrificed? You have to give something up. Where you put something in and didn't get anything out. Or where, this is probably a good measure, where you feel hard done by. Like, this ain't fair. My kids say that a lot lately. This ain't fair. Is it fair that the Father gave up his only Son to cover your sin? Is that fair? Or is that grace? Is that love? Is that perfect love? Loving someone where you feel like you've lost out, where you've given more than you get. Because perhaps that's a better metric of love than the fuzzy feeling that you feel towards someone, even a stranger. You can walk past a homeless person or someone in a pickle or whatever, and your heart can really feel for them. You can be someone who's very full of empathy and love, and you love that. I love people, but you don't do anything about it. I think a better metric is where you actively love and it costs you something. That for me is love. The other thing is just compassion, is just empathy, is just feeling. And it's okay that you feel them things, but if that's in isolation, perhaps that's like an example of faith without works being dead. So I've got a quick challenge as I finish up. Just quickly list in your mind, say your last, 10 occasions this week that love cost you. And some of you might be thinking, this week? What? Maybe struggled to come up with the last 10 months to have 10 things. And I'm being really real. I'm challenging us. I'm challenging you. I'm challenging me. I'm challenging us as a church. I'm challenging the wider church. Is it a struggle to really think where I've practically cost me to love somebody, where I'm never getting anything in return? Because if so, then you're not just in the middle of a cost of living crisis, then you're in the midst of a cost of loving crisis, where you're not willing to pay the cost. Able, because we have the love of God in us. We have the Holy Spirit leading us into doing that. We're able, but perhaps we're not willing. So when was the last time you loved and it really cost you? family aside, friends aside. And if we can't recall, how much of this Jesus way of loving are we really doing? And so I'm asking you individually, are you in a cost of loving crisis where you're able to pay but unwilling? Just like Steph in the supermarket, able to pay but unwilling. Do I love as I should? Do you? Does the church? And if not, for me, that's a crisis where we're unwilling to pay the cost that love demands. And sure, the cost of living crisis is terrible, isn't it? The cost of living crisis is terrible for our culture, for our society. It's really hard. But you know what would be more tragic is if there was a cost of loving crisis in the church. That would cost far more. That would be far more devastating. And if we, the church, are unwilling to pay the cost to love the world, then who will? Because Jesus paid the cost for us, and now we owe that debt to other people. And it will cost us, and it should feel like it costs us sometimes. So I'm asking, will you be the one of many that are needed to act in order to make sure that we, during this cost of living crisis, don't also fall into a cost of loving crisis? So I ask you, who do you need to love? I'm actually asking you, who? And are you willing to pay the cost? Let's pray.